I'm Frances, 28 female. I live in a small, quiet apartment on the third floor of a brick building, the kind with charming squeaks in the floorboards. As a data analyst, my life revolves around numbers, patterns, and finding the logic hidden within chaos. It's a job that suits my personality. I like order, predictability, and facts. This story, however, is about how the one person who was supposed to be my most reliable data point, my father, became the most catastrophic variable in my life, and how I used my skills to balance the equation. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. My relationship with my father, Richard, was like a long-running spreadsheet with a hidden, corrupted formula. On the surface, the numbers looked fine. We had holidays together, bi-weekly phone calls, and the occasional awkward dinner. He was a used car salesman, a man who had mastered the art of the surface-level smile and the firm, reassuring handshake that always felt more like a negotiation tactic than a gesture of affection. At 60, he had a full head of silver hair he was very proud of, and a way of speaking that could make you feel like you were the most important person in the world, right up until the moment he needed something from you. Then, the warmth would vanish, replaced by a cool, calculating expectation. I learned early on that our relationship was transactional. Good grades in high school earned me a barely used sedan from his lot, a car he later reminded me was a significant investment on his part when I asked for help with a college application fee. A promotion at my first job meant I was expected to cover the check at our celebratory dinners. Love, in my father's world, was always conditional, a line item on a budget sheet I could never fully access. My mother had passed away when I was 16, and since then, it had just been the two of us. Her absence created a vacuum that Richard filled not with warmth or guidance, but with a kind of benign neglect punctuated by moments of self-serving interest. His sister, my Aunt Brenda, was his echo. At 58, she worked as a bank teller, a profession that suited her rigid, judgmental nature. She saw the world in terms of deposits and withdrawals, both financially and emotionally. She and my father were thick as thieves, bonded by a shared sense of pragmatism that often tipped over into cold-hearted selfishness. They spoke in a shorthand of knowing glances and unfinished sentences, a language I was never fluent in. Family gatherings were their stage, and I was often the audience to their inside jokes and shared memories from a time before I existed, a time when their world was simpler, and I always suspected, better in their eyes. My best friend Liam was my true family. We'd known each other since kindergarten, and he was the constant in my life's equation. At 29, he was a physical therapist, a job that perfectly matched his patient and supportive nature. He understood the unspoken complexities of my relationship with my father. He never judged. He just listened, offering a steady presence that was the complete opposite of Richard's conditional affection. "The man's a black hole of need, Fran," he'd said once after my father had called to borrow money for a can't-miss investment. "Don't let him pull you in." I tried to keep a safe distance, but he was still my father. He was still listed as my emergency contact. It was a formality, a box to be checked on a form, but it felt like a tether, a last thread of filial duty I couldn't bring myself to cut. The week before the accident, my father called me with a proposition. He was trying to expand his car lot and needed a cosigner for a business loan. "It's just a formality, sweetheart," he'd said, his voice slick with the familiar oil of a sales pitch. "The bank just needs to see another name on the paperwork. It won't affect your credit score, I promise." I knew better. My job had taught me to read the fine print, to see the risks buried in the jargon. I hesitated, and in that hesitation, his tone shifted. The warmth evaporated. "Francis, after everything I've done for you, that car I gave you, the roof over your head for 18 years, I'm not asking for a handout. I'm asking for a little bit of trust." The guilt was a well-honed tool in his arsenal. I felt the familiar pang of obligation, the desire to be the good daughter he could be proud of, but Liam's voice echoed in my head. I politely but firmly declined. "Dad, I can't take on that kind of financial risk right now. My finances are tied up in my own mortgage and investments. The silence on the other end of the line was heavy and cold. Fine, he finally clipped out. I see how it is. Just remember who was there for you when you needed them. He hung up before I could reply. The conversation left a sour taste in my mouth. It wasn't about trust. It was about using my good credit as a bridge for his risky venture. His final words felt like a threat, a dark premonition I couldn't shake. A few days later, on a rainy Tuesday evening, I was driving home from a late meeting. The roads were slick, visibility was low, and the headlights of oncoming traffic smeared across my wet windshield. I was thinking about that phone call, about the transactional nature of my father's love, when a truck ran a red light. I remember the blinding glare of its headlights, the sickening screech of tires, and then a violent, shattering impact that sent my world spinning into darkness. My last conscious thought was a fleeting, strangely calm one. My emergency contact is my father. They'll call him. He'll come. It was a simple, logical assumption, the kind of data point you never think to question. It was the last time I would ever feel that kind of certainty about him again. The illusion of family was about to be shattered as violently as the glass that now surrounded me. The spreadsheet of my life was about to be rewritten, and the final balance would be devastating. The world returned to me not all at once, but in fragmented pieces. A persistent, rhythmic beeping to my right. The sterile, antiseptic smell of a hospital. A dull, throbbing ache that seemed to emanate from every cell in my body, with a sharp, insistent pain in my left leg and a pounding in my head that felt like a drumbeat. I tried to open my eyes, but my eyelids felt like they were weighted down with lead. I managed a slit, and the blurry, white ceiling swam into focus. A woman in blue scrubs was checking the IV drip in my arm. She had kind eyes and a gentle touch. "Welcome back," she said softly, noticing my attempt at consciousness. "You're in the hospital. You were in a car accident. You've been in and out for about a day now." A day, the memories came flooding back in a painful rush. The rain, the headlights, the crunch of metal. My voice was a dry, raspy whisper. "My leg." "You have a broken femur and a pretty serious concussion," she explained, her voice calm and reassuring. "You also have a few fractured ribs and a lot of bruising, but you're going to be okay. You're very lucky." Lucky? It didn't feel like it. Every breath was a struggle, a fresh reminder of the fractured bones in my chest. I tried to shift, and a bolt of white-hot pain shot up my leg, making me cry out. The nurse quickly adjusted my pillows. "Easy now. We've got you on some strong pain medication, but you need to stay as still as possible. The doctor will be in to talk to you soon." My thoughts, foggy from the medication and the concussion, slowly began to clear. A primary, instinctual question pushed its way to the forefront. "My father, did you call him?" "Richard. He's my emergency contact." The nurse's expression flickered. It was a tiny, almost imperceptible shift, but in her kind eyes I saw a flicker of pity. It was a look I didn't understand, and it sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the cool hospital air. "We tried," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "When you were brought into the ER, we called the number listed for your emergency contact several times. We left multiple voicemails." She paused, checking my chart as if the answer was written there. "The calls went unanswered. We eventually had to list you as a Jane Doe until we could identify you from your driver's license in your wallet. The police are handling the notification now, but for that first critical period, we couldn't reach anyone." Her words didn't make sense. Unanswered? My father lived and died by his phone. It was permanently attached to his hand, a vital tool for his trade. He never missed a call, especially from an unknown number. It could always be a potential customer. The idea that he would simply not answer a call from a hospital, a call that could only mean one thing, was inconceivable. "No, that can't be right," I croaked, my throat tight. "He always answers his phone. Always. Maybe you had the wrong number." "We double-checked it from the intake form you filled out for your last checkup," she said gently. "The number was correct. We tried for several hours." A cold dread began to seep into the cracks of my confusion. Hours. I was alone, unidentified for hours, while the person who was supposed to be my first line of defense simply didn't pick up the phone. The nurse, perhaps sensing my distress, tried to soften the blow. "It happens sometimes. People are busy, phones die. I'm sure he'll be here as soon as he gets the message from the police." But I knew my father. His phone was never dead. He was never too busy for a call that could lead to a sale. The only reason he wouldn't answer a call was if he chose not to. The memory of our last conversation surfaced through the haze of pain, my refusal to co-sign his loan, his cold, angry sign-off. "I see how it is. Just remember who was there for you." Was this his idea of teaching me a lesson, a petty, cruel punishment for my lack of trust? The thought was so monstrous, so deeply vile, that I couldn't fully accept it. There had to be another explanation. The doctor came in a short while later, a kind, middle-aged man who explained the extent of my injuries. A long surgery to set the femur with a titanium rod, months of physical therapy, a slow, painful road to recovery. He spoke of medical procedures and recovery timelines, but my mind was stuck on one thing: the unanswered calls. As he talked, a different nurse came in to take my vitals. She was older, more brisk and businesslike than the first. "Is there anyone else we can try to call for you?" she asked, not unkindly, as she wrapped the blood pressure cuff around my arm. "A friend, another relative. It's important to have someone here to help with decisions and to be here for you when you wake up from the surgery." The phrase "when you wake up" hung in the air. The implication was clear. For the most critical period, when I was unconscious and broken in the ER, I had been alone. Utterly and completely alone. The person I had designated to be there for me, the one person the hospital was legally and morally obligated to contact, had ghosted me in my moment of greatest need. "My friend," I managed to say, my voice trembling. "Liam." I recited his number from memory, the 10 digits a lifeline in a sea of uncertainty. The nurse nodded, jotted it down, and left the room. The first nurse returned to check on my pain levels. I looked at her, my eyes pleading for an answer that made sense. "The calls, when did you make them?" She checked the digital log on the computer by my bed. The first call was logged at 7:42 p.m. on Tuesday. We made subsequent calls at 7:55, 8, 15, and a final attempt at 9:00 p.m. We also sent a text message with the hospital's information. No response. The times were a punch to the gut. 7:42 p.m., right after the accident. He would have been home from the car lot, probably watching television. There was no excuse, no plausible deniability. He didn't miss the calls. He ignored them. The silence from his end of the phone line was a deliberate act. It was a choice. And in that choice, I felt the full, crushing weight of his betrayal. The pain in my leg, in my ribs, in my head, was nothing compared to the agony that bloomed in my chest. It was the pain of abandonment, so profound and so absolute it threatened to suffocate me. I was his daughter, lying broken and unidentified in an emergency room, and he had looked at the caller ID, seen the hospital's name, and chosen to do nothing. The silence wasn't an accident. It was a statement. Liam arrived less than an hour after the nurse called him. He burst into the room, his face a mask of frantic worry that melted into profound relief when he saw my eyes were open. He was still in his work scrubs, and he'd clearly broken every traffic law to get there. "Fran," he breathed, rushing to my bedside. He gently took my hand, his touch warm and steady. "Oh my God, I was so worried. They just said there was an accident. How bad is it?" Tears I hadn't realized I was holding back began to stream down my face. The sight of him, the one person I could truly count on, broke down the dam of shock and disbelief I had built around myself. I told him everything: the doctor's diagnosis, the impending surgery, and the cold, terrifying fact of my father's silence. Liam's expression hardened as I spoke. He wasn't surprised, which was somehow both comforting and infuriating. He had always seen my father for exactly who he was. "That son of a," he started, catching himself before he finished. He squeezed my hand. Okay, first things first. We focus on you. I'm here now. I'm not going anywhere. I'll be your emergency contact, your medical proxy, whatever you need. We'll deal with Richard later." His presence was an anchor. He stayed with me until they wheeled me into pre-op, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the storm raging inside me. He handled the hospital administration, filled out paperwork, and spoke to the doctors with a clarity I couldn't muster. He was my family in that moment, in every way that mattered. The surgery to repair my femur was long and grueling. I drifted in and out of a painful, anesthetic fog for what felt like days. When I finally woke up and was coherent enough to think, Liam was there, sitting in the uncomfortable visitor's chair, his laptop open. He'd brought my personal effects from the wreck, my purse, my miraculously intact laptop, and my phone, its screen shattered but still functional. "Hey, sleepyhead," he said with a tired smile. "Welcome back to the land of the living. How's the leg?" "It feels like it's full of angry hornets," I mumbled, my mouth dry. "Sounds about right," he said. "They said the surgery went perfectly. You've officially got more metal in you thaw." A Terminator. We talked for a bit, his light banter a welcome distraction. But the question of my father hung in the air between us. Finally, I had to ask, Have you heard from him?" Liam's jaw tightened. "Yeah, he called me this morning. The police finally got a hold of him. He played the part of the concerned father perfectly." "Oh my God, is she okay?" I was in a dead zone, my phone wasn't working. All the greatest hits. A dead zone? It was such a flimsy, pathetic lie. "He asked for the hospital room number," Liam continued. "I told him I wasn't sure you were ready for visitors." "Thank you," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I wasn't ready. I didn't know if I ever would be. Later that evening, after Liam had gone home to get some rest, I asked the nurse to plug in my phone. The screen was a spiderweb of cracks, but it turned on. My heart pounded in my chest as I navigated to my call log and text messages. I needed to see it for myself. I needed the data. There they were, 4 missed calls from the hospital, time-stamped exactly as the nurse had said. And a text message, "This is Mercy General Hospital. We are trying to reach you regarding Francis, who has been admitted to our emergency department. Please call us back immediately at..." He had seen it, he had to have seen it. There was no other possibility. My hands trembled as I opened the text thread with my father. My last message to him was from a week ago, a simple link to an article I thought he'd find interesting. He'd never replied. There was nothing from him since the accident. No missed calls, no texts asking if I was okay, just silence. Then I opened the text thread with Aunt Brenda. My blood ran cold. There, time-stamped at 8:05 p.m. on the night of the accident, 20 minutes after the first call from the hospital and 10 minutes before the third, was an outgoing message from my father to her. It was short and chillingly casual. "Dad, hospital keeps calling about Francis. Probably just a fender bender. You know how they are, trying to get insurance info. I'm not getting involved in that mess. She was mad at me anyway." I had to read it 3 times before the words fully registered. He knew. He knew I was in the hospital. He hadn't been in a dead zone, his phone hadn't been off. He had received the calls, understood their origin, and made a conscious, calculated decision to ignore them. And not only did he ignore them, he had immediately texted his sister to complain about the inconvenience, dismissing my potential injury as a fender bender and a ploy to get his insurance details. The callousness was breathtaking. He wasn't just neglectful, he was actively, cruelly indifferent. The reason for his indifference was laid bare in his own words. "I'm not getting involved in that mess." The mess, the financial responsibility, the hospital bills. He had left me to suffer alone, unidentified on a gurney, to avoid having to deal with the potential cost. A wave of nausea washed over me, more intense than any side effect from the medication. This wasn't just neglect. This was a level of selfish cowardice that I couldn't comprehend. He hadn't just failed to be a father, he had failed to be a decent human being. His justification, "She was mad at me anyway," was the final, pathetic twist of the knife. He was framing his monstrous abandonment as a reasonable reaction to our argument over the loan. He was the victim. My grief, which had been a dull, throbbing ache, sharpened into something else. It crystallized into a cold, hard, diamond-like rage. The data analyst in me took over. My father had made a decision based on a cold calculation of risk versus reward. He had weighed his daughter's well-being against the potential for financial inconvenience and had chosen the latter. He had created a data set of lies and neglect. And I, more than anyone, knew what to do with data. You analyze it, you find the patterns, and you use it to draw a conclusion. My conclusion was simple. He had treated this as a transaction. He had defaulted on the most fundamental contract between a parent and a child, and a default of that magnitude comes with consequences. The tears stopped. My breathing steadied. I took a screenshot of the text message exchange between him and Brenda. I saved it. I backed it up. It was Exhibit A, the cold, hard data of his betrayal. My investigation had just begun. The next few weeks were a blur of pain, medication, and grueling physical therapy sessions. Liam, true to his word, was my rock. He visited every day, bringing me food, books, and a steady supply of bad jokes. As a physical therapist himself, he was able to translate the doctor's jargon and help me understand the long road ahead. He'd sit on the edge of my bed and help me with the simple, agonizing exercises designed to coax my muscles back to life. More than that, he listened. He let me rage and cry, letting me process the sheer magnitude of what my father had done. During this time, Richard and Brenda launched a full-scale charm offensive. They started with phone calls, which I ignored. Then came the texts, dripping with faux concern. "Francis, honey, we're so worried. Why won't you pick up? We just want to know you're okay." From Brenda. "Sweetheart, I am so sorry my phone was acting up. I feel terrible. Please let me come see you." From Richard. The lies were so blatant, so insulting, that they only fueled my resolve. They sent flowers to the hospital room, a gaudy bouquet of lilies that smelled funereal. I had the nurse donate them to the general ward. They even showed up at the hospital once, but I had already instructed the staff that I was not accepting visitors by those names. They were turned away, an event that resulted in a flurry of indignant texts about how hurt they were by my coldness. Their performance was almost impressive. They were building a narrative, one in which they were the loving, concerned family members being inexplicably shut out by a difficult, ungrateful daughter. They were gaslighting me on an epic scale, hoping to rewrite history before the ink was even dry. But I had the screenshot. I had the data. Their narrative was fiction. With Liam's help, I started to dig. My father's excuse for needing a cosigner on his loan had been business expansion. But was that the truth? As a data analyst, I knew where to look. Public records, social media, forgotten corners of the internet, they all tell a story if you know how to read them. While my body was trapped in a hospital bed, my mind was free to roam the digital world. I started with simple searches. The name of my father's car lot, Richard's Reliable Rides, brought up a slew of terrible reviews I'd never bothered to look at before. Customers complained of hidden fees, mechanical failures days after purchase, and aggressive, dishonest sales tactics. More damningly, I found records on the county court website. He was being sued by 2 different former customers for fraud. These weren't small claims, they were serious lawsuits that threatened to bankrupt him. The business wasn't expanding, it was sinking. The loan he'd pressured me for wasn't for growth. It was a desperate attempt to stay afloat, to cover his legal fees and potential settlements. He hadn't just wanted my good credit, he'd wanted a lifeboat, and he was willing to sink me to get it. This discovery contextualized his panic and, in a twisted way, his actions. A daughter in the hospital meant bills. It meant a potential financial drain at the exact moment he was facing financial ruin. In his mind, my accident wasn't a family crisis. It was a business liability. Ignoring the hospital's calls was a cost mitigation strategy. It was the most brutally transactional decision a parent could make. But I knew this couldn't be the first time he'd acted this way. This level of selfishness doesn't just appear overnight. It's a pattern, repeated and refined over a lifetime. I started thinking back, re-examining my childhood through this new, harsh lens. I remembered my mother's long illness before she passed. I had been a teenager, lost in my own world of grief, but now I recalled snippets of conversations, hushed arguments between my parents about the cost of her treatments. I remembered my father complaining about the insurance copays, about how her medical bills were draining them dry. At the time, I'd interpreted it as stress. Now, I saw it for what it was: resentment. He resented the cost of her care. The most painful memory resurfaced with horrifying clarity. A few months before my mother died, she had wanted to take a trip, a final family vacation to the beach house her parents had owned. She was weak, but she was desperate for one last happy memory. My father had shut it down immediately. "We can't afford it, Carol," he'd said, his voice firm. "It's out of the question. It's not practical." She had been crushed. I remembered her crying quietly in her bedroom later that night. A week after the funeral, however, my father had come home with a brand new, top-of-the-line set of golf clubs. "A great deal I couldn't pass up," he'd announced proudly. At the time, I hadn't made the connection. Now, it was a glaring, ugly truth. He had denied my dying mother her last wish because it wasn't practical, but had indulged in a frivolous purchase for himself just days after she was gone. Aunt Brenda was complicit in all of it. I remembered her siding with him during the vacation argument. "He's right, Carol. You need to be sensible. Richard has to think about the future." Brenda's version of sensible was always whatever was most convenient for my father. The pieces were falling into place, forming a mosaic of profound, pathological selfishness. My accident wasn't an isolated incident. It was the climax of a long story, the ultimate data point in a trend line that stretched back decades. My father didn't just abandon me in the hospital. He had a history of abandoning his family whenever it became inconvenient or expensive. He had done it to my mother in her final days, and now he had done it to me. I compiled everything I found: the court records, the customer reviews, my own recontextualized memories. I organized it all into a secure digital folder, each piece of evidence a nail in the coffin of the man I once thought he was. The grief I felt was no longer for the father I had lost in that moment of betrayal, but for the one I had never truly had. He had never been the man I thought he was. He was a character he played, a role he adopted when it suited him. And when the script called for sacrifice, for unconditional love, he simply walked off the stage. This investigation was no longer just about getting revenge for the unanswered calls. It was about holding him accountable for a lifetime of emotional and financial neglect. It was about justice for my mother as much as for me. He had spent his life avoiding consequences, talking his way out of trouble with a smile and a lie. That was about to end. He dealt in used cars with hidden problems. I dealt in data. And I had just uncovered every single flaw, every bit of rust and rot hidden beneath his polished exterior. By the time I was discharged from the hospital, my body was still weak, but my mind was a razor. I moved into Liam's apartment, as mine was on the third floor with no elevator, an impossible climb with my legs still in a brace. He set me up in his guest room, which quickly became my command center. My days were divided into two main activities: grueling physical therapy to rebuild the strength in my leg, and the meticulous construction of my father's downfall. Liam was my partner in both. He would help me with my stretches and exercises in the morning, and in the afternoon, we would sit at his dining table, laptops open, piecing together the plan. The goal wasn't just to expose him. That felt too simple. I wanted him to feel the exact same kind of powerlessness and financial panic that he had inflicted on me and my mother. I wanted to hit him where he lived, his wallet and his reputation, the two things he valued above all else. My revenge would be a multi-pronged attack, a campaign built on data, legal pressure, and public humiliation. The first phase was financial. The hospital bills had started to arrive, and the total was staggering. The surgery, the hospital stay, the future physical therapy, it was all adding up to a six-figure sum that my insurance wouldn't fully cover. Normally, this would be a terrifying burden, but I saw it as an opportunity. It was the weapon he had inadvertently handed me. Liam, whose paralegal ex-girlfriend had taught him a thing or two about the law, suggested I consult with a personal injury lawyer. "The truck driver who hit you was uninsured and driving a stolen vehicle," he explained. "Your own uninsured motorist coverage will kick in, but there's another angle here." I found a sharp, aggressive lawyer named Ms. Diaz. I laid out the whole story for her, including my father's refusal to answer the hospital's calls. She was initially focused on the accident itself, but when I showed her the text message from my father to Brenda, her eyes lit up with a predator's gleam. "This is more than just bad parenting, Ms. Davis," she said, leaning forward. "This is negligence, willful endangerment even. While suing a parent for emotional distress is difficult, we can use this as leverage. Your father's actions directly led to a delay in your identification and could have impacted your immediate care. He abandoned his duty. We can make his life very, very uncomfortable." Our strategy was twofold. First, Ms. Diaz would handle the insurance claims, maximizing my payout. Second, and more importantly, she would draft a formal letter to my father. It would inform him that, due to his documented refusal to act as my emergency contact and his subsequent abandonment, I was formally holding him civilly liable for a portion of my uncovered medical expenses and emotional distress. It wasn't about winning a massive judgment in court. The legal bar for that was high. It was about applying legitimate, terrifying legal pressure. The letter would mention the text message as evidence of his willful negligence. It was a shot across the bow, designed to induce panic. The second phase was public. My father's business, Richard's Reliable Rides, was already circling the drain thanks to his shady practices. I decided to give it a final, decisive push into the abyss. I created a detailed, anonymous website. I called it https://www.google.com/search Q equals Richards Rides the Truth.com. On it, I meticulously documented everything. I posted screenshots of the dozens of negative reviews from Google, Yelp, and the Better Business Bureau. I uploaded copies of the public court documents from the fraud lawsuits filed against him. I created a narrative not of a disgruntled daughter, but of a concerned consumer advocate, warning potential buyers about a predatory local business. Then, I wrote a detailed, factual account of a hypothetical customer's experience, a story that mirrored my own experience of his selfishness. It was the story of a young woman who bought a car from him, was promised it was safe and reliable, only to have it break down and leave her stranded. It was an allegory, close enough to the truth to be potent, but fictionalized enough to be legally airtight. I ended the story with a chilling question. If this is how he treats his customers, how do you think he treats his own family? To make sure the website got traction, I used my data analysis skills. I researched local community Facebook groups, online forums, and news outlets. I bought targeted ad space on social media, geofencing it to a 10-mile radius around his car lot. For less than $100, anyone in his town searching for used cars, or even his specific business name, would see an ad for my website at the top of their results. It was a digital siege. The final phase was personal. It was aimed at Aunt Brenda. She was his enabler, his co-conspirator. She had stood by and validated his monstrous decision. Her complicity deserved its own consequence. Brenda worked at a major national bank, a company that prided itself on community trust and ethical conduct. I drafted a formal, anonymous complaint to the bank's corporate ethics and compliance department. In it, I detailed how a senior employee, Brenda, was actively enabling and colluding with a family member, engaging in fraudulent business practices. I cited the lawsuits and behavior that demonstrated a profound lack of moral character. I described the hospital incident without naming myself as the victim, framing it as something I had second-hand knowledge of. I questioned whether an individual with such poor judgment should be handling people's finances. It was a long shot, but corporate entities are terrified of liability and reputational damage. An internal investigation, even a minor one, would put her under a microscope and cause her immense stress. The plan was complete. Each piece was designed to dismantle his world. The legal threat would attack his finances. The website would destroy his business and public reputation. And the complaint against Brenda would isolate him by turning his closest ally into a liability. Liam reviewed the whole plan, a slow smile spreading across his face. "It's brutal, Fran. It's a work of art." He treated me like a line on a spreadsheet, I said, my voice steady. I'm just balancing the books. With everything in place, I sat back. I had built the architecture of his consequences. Now, all I had to do was execute the plan and wait for the foundations of his world to crumble. The first domino fell a week after I left the hospital. Ms. Diaz sent the certified letter to my father's address. Liam and I tracked the delivery online, watching its progress like a missile approaching its target. The moment it was marked as signed for by R. Davis, we knew the clock was ticking. For 2 days, there was silence. I imagined him reading the letter, the color draining from his face as he saw the words willful negligence, civil liability, and the explicit mention of his text to Brenda. I pictured his panic, the frantic calculations running through his head. The man who had built his life on avoiding consequences was now facing a legally binding document detailing his own. The explosion came on the 3rd day. My phone rang and his name flashed on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. He called again, and again. After the 5th call, a voicemail notification popped up. Liam and I listened to it on speaker. It was a rambling, incoherent tirade. The smooth, confident salesman was gone, replaced by a panicked, sputtering mess. "Francis, what is this? What the hell is this lawyer nonsense? You're trying to ruin me. After everything I've done for you, this is insane. You need to call this woman off right now. This is slander. I'll sue you. I'll sue the hospital." He sounded winded, terrified. The threat of legal action had shattered his composure. It was the sound of a bully who had just been punched in the mouth for the first time. While he was reeling from the legal threat, Phase 2 was quietly launching. The website and the targeted ads went live. At first, it was just a trickle of traffic. Then, someone shared the link in the town's main community Facebook group. Anyone have experience with Richard's reliable rides? Saw this website and it's concerning. The post blew up. Dozens of people commented, sharing their own horror stories about my father's business. Former customers he had scammed, neighbors who found him arrogant, even a former employee who anonymously confirmed his dishonest practices. The website became a rallying point for everyone he had ever wronged. My allegorical story was quoted, its final. Question hanging in the air. If this is how he treats his customers, how do you think he treats his own family? The local news blog picked up the story, framing it as a case of a local business facing a wave of online consumer backlash. They called his car lot for a comment, but he, in his panic, refused to speak to them, which only made him look guiltier. His digital reputation was being dismantled in real time, and every like and share was another nail in his coffin. The fallout with Brenda was even more satisfying. About a week after I sent the anonymous complaint to her bank's ethics department, she called me. Her voice was a high-pitched, panicked whisper. "Francis, you have to help me," she pleaded. "Someone filed a complaint against me at work. They're starting an internal investigation. They're asking me questions about Richard, about his business. They even asked me if I knew about a family member being in the hospital recently. Francis, this is my career. I could lose my job." I remained silent, letting her panic fill the space. "Did you do this?" she finally asked, her voice cracking. "Why would you do this to me? I'm your aunt." "Were you my aunt when you received that text from my father?" I asked, my voice as cold and flat as a steel plate. "Were you my aunt when you chose to say nothing, to do nothing, while I was lying in a hospital, unidentified and alone? You weren't family then. You were just his accomplice. You made your choice, Brenda. Now live with it." I hung up. The satisfaction was immense. I had turned his greatest ally against him. Her priority was no longer protecting her brother. It was saving herself. I later heard from a distant cousin that Brenda was put on administrative leave and was desperately trying to distance herself from Richard, telling anyone who would listen that she had no idea about the true state of his business and was deeply concerned by his recent behavior. She threw him under the bus to save her own skin, just as I had predicted. He was now truly alone. The final confrontation was not something I planned, but it was inevitable. He showed up at Liam's apartment building, having somehow found out I was staying there. He was waiting in the lobby when Liam and I returned from a physical therapy appointment. He looked terrible. His suit was rumpled, his silver hair was a mess, and his eyes were bloodshot and wild with desperation. He looked like one of his own broken-down cars, the shiny exterior stripped away to reveal the rusted, failing machinery underneath. "Francis," he started, stepping forward, "we need to talk, you need to stop this." Liam immediately stepped between us. "You're not welcome here, Richard, you need to leave." "This is between me and my daughter," he snarled, trying to push past Liam. I held up a hand. "It's okay, Liam." I looked my father dead in the eye. The fear and awe I once held for him were gone, replaced by a cold, clear pity. He was just a pathetic, small man. "There's nothing to talk about," I said calmly. "You made a series of choices. Now you're experiencing the consequences. It's simple cause and effect." "I'm ruined," he yelled, his voice echoing in the small lobby. "My business is finished. Brenda won't even speak to me. My lawyer says I'm facing bankruptcy. You did this to me." "No," I said, my voice unwavering. "You did this to yourself. You did this the moment you looked at your phone, saw the hospital's name, and chose to ignore it. You did this when you prioritized your wallet over your own child. Everything happening now, this is just the bill coming due. This is the final invoice for a lifetime of selfishness. You taught me that everything is a transaction, remember? Well, consider our account settled. I am writing you off as a bad debt." He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. For the first time in his life, Richard Davis had no sales pitch. There was no lie, no angle, no charming smile that could get him out of this. He was facing the unvarnished, unnegotiable truth. He finally deflated, the anger draining out of him, leaving behind a hollowed-out shell. He looked old and weak and utterly defeated. He turned without another word and walked out the door. I didn't watch him go. I had already closed the book on that chapter of my life. The indictment had been served, the verdict rendered. Justice, I had learned, was just another form of data analysis. And the numbers, in the end, don't lie. The weeks that followed the confrontation were quiet. The storm had passed, leaving behind a strange and liberating calm. My father didn't try to contact me again. The last I heard, he had declared bankruptcy, losing the car lot and his house. He moved into a small, rented apartment across town. His digital footprint was a wasteland of one-star reviews and articles about his failed business. He had become a local cautionary tale. Brenda, after a lengthy and stressful internat. Investigation, kept her job, but was passed over for a promotion she had been counting on. Her reputation at the bank was tarnished, and her relationship with her brother was severed beyond repair. They were two islands of misery, isolated by the consequences of their own choices. I felt no triumph in their downfall, only a quiet sense of closure. My goal was never to destroy them for the sake of destruction, but to rebalance the scales. They had created a massive deficit in my life, a debt of love, trust, and basic human decency. My actions were simply an audit, a final accounting of what was owed. The final balance sheet was now zero. My focus shifted entirely to my recovery. With Liam's unwavering support, I threw myself into physical therapy. Every painful step on the treadmill, every agonizing leg lift, was a step away from the person I used to be, the daughter who craved approval from a man incapable of giving it. The titanium rod in my femur was a permanent reminder of the accident, but it was also a symbol of my newfound strength. I had been broken, but I had been rebuilt, stronger and with more metal than before. 6 months after the accident, I was walking without a limp, the brace long gone. I moved into a new apartment, a beautiful first-floor unit with a small garden, a place I chose for myself, a place that felt like a true home. The settlement from the insurance company, expertly negotiated by Ms. Diaz, covered all my medical bills and left me with a significant cushion. It was a financial security my father had tried to deny me, and it gave me a freedom I had never known. My relationship with Liam blossomed into something more than friendship. He had seen me at my absolute worst, broken, vengeful, and raw, and had not only stayed but had held my hand through it all. Our bond, forged in the crucible of crisis, was the most real and unconditional connection I had ever known. He was my true emergency contact, in every sense of the word. One afternoon, sitting in my new living room with Liam, I found myself thinking about my mother. I thought about her wish for one last family vacation, a wish denied out of selfishness disguised as practicality. On an impulse, I opened my laptop and booked a 2-week trip to the coast, to the same beach town she had loved so much. I booked a beautiful little cottage right on the water. "What was that for?" Liam asked, smiling. "It's for my mom," I said, a lump forming in my throat. "It's a debt being paid." The trip was healing. I walked along the shore, the sand cool beneath my feet, and I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. I was not defined by my father's abandonment or by the anger that had fueled my revenge. Those were just chapters in my story, not the whole book. I was defined by my resilience, by my capacity to heal, and by the love of the people who truly mattered. I still work as a data analyst. I still find comfort in numbers and logic, but I've learned that the most important data points in life aren't found on a spreadsheet. They are the moments of kindness, the acts of loyalty, the quiet presence of someone who will answer the call in the middle of the night, no questions asked. My father taught me a brutal lesson about the cold calculus of selfishness. But my recovery, my new life with Liam, and the peace I found on that beach taught me a much more powerful one. That after you write off the bad debts, you are free to invest in what truly matters, and the returns are immeasurable. My ledger is finally balanced, and for the first time, my future looks infinitely, beautifully profitable.